So, what is the genre of music that you'd be classified as?
Gospel.
Gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Just so I don't word that incorrectly. Thank you.
That's all right.
All right, Russ.
Yes.
Russ, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I was raised in Visalia. There's a town in the San Joaquin Valley called Farmersville. And Grandpa had a farm in the Ozarks. And the farm kind of bellied up, and he ran moonshine during the that era.
Prohibition?
Prohibition, yeah. Prohibition, yes. And got caught, spent a year in jail, and came to L.A. after that by himself and worked in the shipyard building ships before the Second World War. And then he began slowly, the children, his wife, started moving out here. And when my dad got married, and he had just got back from Europe, fighting over there, and they lived in a tent behind Grandpa's house for a while. But Jesus was all over the place and dominated. Daddy was a Pentecostal preacher, and he worked on farm machinery. Mom worked in the fields picking up walnuts, and it took both of them working very, very hard to make ends meet. We lived in a 2-bedroom house that 5 boys was in one room, and Mom and Dad in the other. Mom, what they call, got saved, and she changed her life, and then Dad got saved. And he felt like he was supposed to be a preacher, so he changed his life. But it was a really cultish, backwoods kind of a Pentecostal religion. They no newspapers, no magazines, no radio, no television. Can't participate in school because that's partaking of the world, and so you just lived under condemnation, and we're taught that you're not good, and you'll never be good enough. And you work real hard trying to be good, but it was never enough. So you just lived under guilt. And I was just going to say, to start this thing off, that guilt is something you did bad, but shame is you are bad. And that's what was poured into me at a very early age. But Dad was very charismatic. And he was a great preacher. I mean, he could really pull people in. And Mom was a great singer. And so 4 years old was my first solo. She put me up on the altar and I sang. And I idolized him. I really, really did. I have 4 brothers, and growing up, we had a quartet together where we would all sing together, and Dad would go hold revivals in the summer. That was our vacation, 4 weeks of revival, and we had to be in service every night. But he was quite a man, and he was the face of God for me. We were at church 4 nights a week, and one Saturday night, he didn't show up. And Mama sent me home. We were about a half a block from the church, and Mom sent me home to say, church has started, you better hurry up and get here. And I walked in the house, and then back in that little shotgun house, I heard singing that was really weird, just really strange, and it scared the crap out of me. I didn't know what it was, and I knew it was my dad's voice, but he was singing, and I went back there, and I didn't know what it was, I was 7, I didn't know what was going on, so I ran and got Mom, and she came back, and she just burst into tears saying, "Oh, Joe, oh, Joe, oh, Joe." And that's when our world just came crashing down. And it started till he died, 8 months sober relapse, 6 months sober relapse, a year sober relapse. And he was conniving, and he could manipulate people. And so he loved to preach. That was his golf, that was fishing, that was everything, was preaching. And so when he would get thrown out, and unfortunately they threw me out too, and my brothers, and nobody would talk to us. You know, everybody shunned us. And they would bring him home out of the drunk tank. And he would come in the front door and immediately started calling Mom the C word, bitch, whore. And I was just shocked. And I'd take my little brother and I'd shove him under the bed. Until he kind of calmed down. We were scared of him. He was 6'2", and when he got drunk, you never knew what he was going to do. And so when he would get back in the room and kind of settle down, me and my little brother, we would get out and go outside. But he was the face of God. And unfortunately, at 7 years old, I was taught to lie. Just lie. And people would ask, you know, and I would lie about Dad. And when you were raised and you want to be right, you want to be good, and then all of a sudden you're going against everything you believe and were taught, and you're lying. And I remember I was 9, and you can't talk outside the family. You just can't talk outside the family. That was just such a crossing a line that was destructive if you talked outside the family. And I was 9, and I told my little friend, Mom and Dad had an argument. And, you know, if you're a preacher in that cult and that, you know, Pentecostal thing, you have to be perfect. And so all that taught you to do was hide, you know, and lie. But I came home, and Mom was waiting for me. She heard about it, and she said, "Sit down in this chair." And I sit down in the chair, and she starts screaming, "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family. You just don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." And she grabbed books out of the bookshelf and just started throwing them at me. "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." And then came over to me and started punching me with her fist in the face. And I wound up in a ball in the corner with her just kicking the crap out of me, saying, "You don't talk outside the family. You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." And I mean, I had to wear bruises. I mean, I had bruises that I had a long sleeve shirt, you know, to go to school for 2 weeks. And she would rage, just rage. And in the middle of all of this, there was Jesus that they were preaching, you know, Jesus, and that he could change your life and he could make all things new, but it wasn't working for them. And it just really confused a kid when they're saying one thing and living another way. And is this all bullshit? I mean, is it just all bullshit? And I was 13. Dad had maneuvered, you know, and worked behind the scenes, and they let him back in. It was only 20 people, you know, and nobody wanted to pastor it. There was no money, there was nothing. But I mean, preaching, he loved that. So, you know, he would go talk to this one, and go talk to this, and well, I'm 6 months sober or whatever, and then they would let him back in. But he got drunk again. I was 13, and they were having a meeting, the men of the church, to decide what they were going to do with him and vote him out or whatever. And Mom asked me to go down, told me to go down there to hear what everybody was saying so I could come back and tell her. And I sat there and cried. I mean, he's your dad, and you're just confused with this whole thing, and Jesus is in the middle of it. And so I go back and I tell Mom, excuse me, the older I get, the more I cry. So they voted Daddy out. And I had to go back and tell Mom, and, she was always, who said what, and, protect and dodge and weave. Well, I couldn't play sports. I was short and slow, and, there's not a lot of demand for that. But I learned to play guitar and sing. And that was my solace, my place of comfort, was just music. And me alone and music. And so my deal was I would go on Sunday night. There was plenty of time, 20 people, and I could learn a song on my guitar. And I would go down there on Sunday night and, at the right time, I would get up and I would sing my song with my acoustic. Well, they voted Daddy out. And so Sunday night came. And I took my little box, guitar, and I go to this church, and it's a small church, and I open the door to go in. And my uncle took me by the arm, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I came to sing." And he said, "No, you're not. You're not going to sing." And I said, "Uncle, I didn't do anything wrong." And he said, "I don't care. You're his son, and we don't want you here." And this religion just always made me feel unworthy. And because of Daddy and that transferred shame when I was younger, you were never, ever good enough. And Dad and Mom would say, both of them, is growing up, you're not worth the bullet to shoot you with, not worth the salt that goes on your bread, and you will never amount to anything. Constant, And why can't you be like my cousin? He was a straight A student, something like that. And they say it to you so much that it goes in your brain and down your spine. Then you start saying it to yourself. I'm not good enough. And I don't deserve anything. And there was just shame all around me. And it was a coat that I was wearing. And no matter how good I was and what I did, I'm never good enough. And so I did a concert. I'm jumping ahead. I did a concert and invited this gospel group in. It was the biggest gospel group in the country at the time. And my little band sang. But 17 years old, we moved back to Arkansas. At 15, I decided, all fell on my shoulders. It was my decision. We got to get out of here. Nobody will talk to us. I remember at 13 walking down the street, and I would see people from the church, and they would cross the street so they wouldn't have to see me. And they're Jesus people, they love everybody, and they were shunning me. And Mom fell apart. And, she was frying hamburgers and Dad wasn't working. And it started at 12 that you can't talk outside the family. You just can't talk outside the family. And for some reason, my mother chose me. I had 3 older brothers, but for some reason, she chose me. And it was emotional incest. She would come to my room at night, and it's not physical, it's just emotional. And I would have to sit up on the edge of the bed And she would tell me that we're probably going to lose the house because Dad's not working, and lunch money, just the whole thing. And she would pour all of her shit out on me, pour it out on me, and I would just have to sit there. One time, the first time she did it, I said, I wish he would just leave. And she backhands me and says, he's your father, you got to respect him. And she's, just upset and yelling, but dumping it on me. And then she would leave and go back to her bedroom, and I'm sitting, what do you do with it? I can't talk to anybody. And somebody had told me somewhere along that Jesus could be your friend. He was a friend. And so we couldn't go to church anymore, and we were isolated and alone. Nobody would talk to us. And again, Jesus, 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 but no love, no compassion, no forgiveness. So she would go back to her room, and I would sit there just terrified. But there was a key to that little church. And 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, when nobody would be around, and I would come into this church and not turn on any lights. In a dark church, and at 10:30 at night, it's terrifying. And so I would feel my way to the front, and I would turn on a little lamp, and I heard Jesus could be my friend. And I would just talk to him. And I would tell him how scared I was, and tell him I didn't know what to do, and ask for his help. And so I started doing that. She would come and dump on me, and I would go to that little church 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I would feel my way to the front, and I would sit there. Jesus can be your friend. And so I would talk to him. And that went on for, 3 or 4 years. And you're not worth the bullet to shoot you with. You're not worth the salt that goes on your bread. And you'll never amount to anything. And then you start believing it, You just start believing it, that you're not good enough. And you can't trust anybody. You can't trust anybody because they will turn on you. They'll turn on you. And again, these are Christian people and family. They were family. But we moved to Arkansas, Hot Springs. There was, Mom had some relatives there, and they had a church, and Dad had held revivals for them, when we were younger. And they said, come back here, and we'll help you. And so we moved to Arkansas. We loaded Dad in the back of the station wagon and hired somebody to drive us back to Arkansas. And again, the responsibility of it all fell on me. And I knew I wasn't doing a good job, but Anyway, I was 17. It was my last year of high school, and I did it back there. And the 9th grade year. Let me jump back to the 9th grade in Farmersville. I was on the honor roll first time, and I was on the swim team. I could swim, had big lungs, and I remember Dad had to come and pick me up after one of the just tournaments, and he wouldn't even get out of the car. He would just sit there in the car, and I swam my heart out. Dad's watching me, he's watching me, and I swam hard, and I didn't win, but I just wanted him to see me, see me. And I grabbed my stuff real fast because I knew he was pissed. that he had to come and get me. And I get in the car, and the first thing he said is, you ought to lose some weight. And that's all he said, you know. I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, but I started, when I was 14, I started getting really good, you know, singing. And Dad was such a narcissist. I mean, he really, really was. And our whole world revolved around him. And as I began to get better, he began to get threatened by me. So 13, 14, 15, I would sing and I would get attention and people noticed me. But he was jealous of me. So as my gift began to grow, he was threatened by it. So and I knew after I did it, performed, and people responded, that he wouldn't talk to me for 3 days. And so as my gift began to grow, and I began to get really good at this, he began to get more jealous and more jealous and more jealous of me. And I knew after I performed that it'd be 2 or 3 days before he'd talk to me again. You just feel like they don't like you. They just don't like you. And you're not good enough. And I was on the honor roll. And I'd never been on the honor roll before. And over the holidays, Christmas holidays, he relapsed real big, and threw him out of the church again, and threw me out of the church again. And the next semester after the honor roll and the chaos in the home, I flunked. I just flunked. And so I come back and again just so humiliated because of my grades. They put me in special ed. I mean, from the honor roll to special ed, and back then they didn't know something's going on in the home. It's so humiliating. I mean, my friends, hey, where are you? We didn't see you today. You don't want to say, well, I'm over here. Shame. My God, they were just shame. But my last year of high school in Arkansas, he relapsed again, and I knew it was over. That was our last place. The last hope that we had was Arkansas, and he pastored a little church there, and he was sober for a while, but he relapsed during that semester of high school for me, and there was so much stress inside of me that my hands began to swell and break out in rashes on my hands, and sores would break out on my back that wouldn't heal. And I went to a doctor, and he said, "Son, do you have a venereal disease?" I said, "No, I'm a virgin. I've never had sex before." And he said, "Son, something's going on in your life, and you better change it. You better change it." And that senior high year, the homeroom teacher was June Smedley, and she saw what was going on, and she saw my grades just plummeting again, and she had had foster kids in her house before, and she saw what was going on with me, and she and her husband talked. And I knew Mom and Dad were getting their head back to California, and again, I was shunned by everybody in that church. And they make you feel like shit. But I called her Mama June, and they brought me to their house. And it was a family. They had a brother and a sister, and they loved each other. And they supported each other, and they would go to the basketball games and PTA, parent teachers. And my parents never went to anything I did in school. Never went to parent teacher day. But moving in that house, and the first time I saw love, just love, and I felt I was betraying my mom and dad if they, they loved me. And the first year, I got a job, and it was before I went to college, and I began to let love in, and they weren't Christian. They went to church, to a Methodist church, but they accepted me. I mean, and they made me feel worthy of something. I mean, they really did. And I began to let it in some, just let it in some, but I didn't trust it because I'd had it before and they'd yank it away, had it before and yank it away. But I began to feel love, real love. And it felt so good. And so Mom and Dad went back to California, and I stayed. I stayed with them. They asked me to live with them, so I didn't go back to California with Mom and Dad, and I stayed there. And I started this college, and I got a music scholarship, singing at this little university in Arkansas, and I began to change. I just, when love comes into your life, it's medicine, and it heals, and it heals your brain. And I mean, it's just such a powerful, powerful force to cause change. And they thought I was a great singer, I would do little concerts with my guitar in a little church over there, and they'd come, sit on the front row, and clap for me. And I don't know, my world began to change, but at the core of me was shame. At the core of me was just shame. And then I was terrified that I would mess up and they'd throw me out, because that just became who I was. I mean, even in that cult, I call it, I remember sex was wrong. Sex was just wrong. And they taught the kids that, sex is wrong. But then I would hear my mom and dad making love in the back room, and it was like, what the hell? I mean, it was crazy, just crazy. So finding love, being around love, it began to heal a lot in me. But that core of me was still sick. I mean, it was still just damaged and bruised and didn't trust. And I would let it in a little bit and then shove it back because I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Well, they want to love me. Okay, but then I'd shove it back. But my little band, like I said, we invited that group to come to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we went out and raised money. And it was called the Contemporary Christian Music, which they take gospel music, but in real contemporary style. And 2 years later, I got a call from this group. And they said, would you come and try out? Come to Nashville and try out. And what the hell are they calling me for? I'm not good enough to do that. And so I go to Nashville, and they hired me that night. And that world and being sucked into it was like putting a fire hose in your mouth and just pulling it, and it's just a force. You're on the road 290 days a year, and you would sing to thousands of people. But again, I didn't feel worthy to be there, and people are going to find out I'm not good enough. And I just covered in shame and guilt. that was just poured into me as a child, And I was 24, and I won my first Grammy. And they're celebrating the record label. We were out here at the Shrine Auditorium, and I'm 24, and it's just like the greatest award you can get. And I go back to the hotel with my wife, and within 45 minutes, they gave this to the wrong person. It was like joy was just pulled away, and you didn't trust. 2 years later, we won another Grammy, and the same thing. I never drank because of Dad. And I had 3 of my 5 boys were not me at the time, but were addicts. And 2 of them came back from Vietnam, just LSD everything. And one of them never sobered up and doing crack and in prison. And the other one was an alcoholic. And so I never touched it until I was 26. Now I was in New York. Tori, my wife, God, what a blessing from God she's been. God, she held me and encouraged me and talked to me and got me in therapy. But I was in New York. Her brother played with the New York Philharmonic, and it was my first time to hear a symphony. And I was alone in the apartment, 5th floor, and down in the Village with, on the top floor, 5th floor, and it was just so damn hot. And there were 3 Heinekens in the refrigerator. And I opened one, and I drank it. And I felt something. And those voices got quieter. And I had the other one, and the voices got quieter. And I had the third, and the voices were silent. And I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. This must be how everybody lives. How, everybody else normal must feel this way. And God, it was incredible. All the voices were silent. But right at the beginning of it, the euphoria of the whole thing, and the guilt being gone, and the shame being gone, immediately I start lying. Immediately. Covering it up. And just like I lied for our family, I started lying for my own protection, But I loved it. I loved it. There was peace. There was contentment. And God in heaven, I can live this way. And it began to... And when you're a gospel singer and you're drinking... oh, shit. The guilt and the shame of it. Oh, and that group that I joined, when I turned 25... because I was youngest, my job driving the bus was from midnight to 7 in the morning. Because I was the youngest. The other guys were older than me. So after a show, I would have to get behind the wheel of that bus and drive 7 hours to the next city and then sleep, and then do another show and then drive all night long. And I was so sleepy that I was at a truck stop and I'd never smoked. And I never drank coffee. But I bought a pack of cigarettes and a cup of coffee. And so I drank the coffee, and I hated the cigarette, but it kind of, gave me that adrenaline lift so I could drive. And so now I'm this gospel singer that's traveling everywhere and standing in front of people. The songs that I'd written about contentment and peace and the joy of a higher power that can be with you. And I can't wait to get back to the hotel to drink and just shut everything down. And God, I was in hell. I was just in hell trying to be what they wanted me to be and what I'd stand on stage and try to present. And I meant everything I said, and I meant every word I sang. But I couldn't wait. And it was waiting for me. I do my damnedest not to drink before a show. And then I would perform. And I would head to the back of the bus where I'd have a bottle of vodka tucked under the mattress. And I turned it to my dad. And I hated him. I hated him. And now I'm just like him. And I'm traumatizing my wife just like he traumatized me. And my world just got completely out of control. And you should stop. You know. But there's just that gene up here that held me. And what was euphoria then turned into bloody hell. I remember trying to shave before a show, and I couldn't look at myself in the eye. I couldn't look at myself. I hated myself so much that I couldn't. And so I would shave looking at my chin, but I hated myself. And again, just covered with shame because I know I was supposed to be this way, but I was this way. And my wife, God, what a jewel she's been these years. But I was getting ready to tour Australia, and I was supposed to leave in 3 days. And we were at the therapist's office. And I haven't sobered up yet, but we were going to therapy. And some of the therapy sessions, I was like this. And trying to hold my hands down. And I didn't even know if I was making sense when we talked. But my wife said, God, what an amazing woman she is. She said, if you don't get help, I'm leaving you. Now, for some reason in my head, she was the last thread of sanity. Just that last thread that could save me. And she said, if you don't get help, I'm leaving you. And so somebody found a treatment center out of Nashville away. And I don't go to Europe. I don't go to Australia. And God, I pissed the promoter off. But it was my life. It was my life. I mean, they had already booked shows and promoted and everything else, but I was fighting for my life, and I was fighting for my marriage. And I was fighting for sanity. I mean, I was so out of control. And so I go to this treatment center. And I was sober, I think, 2 days before I went in. I was scared after my wife told me. And so it was like, if you don't get help, I'm out of here. So I'm in the treatment center, and the first night, they put me in detox, and I was between two cocaine addicts screaming all night long. And now here I am, this little gospel singer. I mean, dear God in heaven, where am I at? But that was the place that I just broke and collapsed. And I told God that I loved. I did, Since I was a kid, I really loved him. So in the treatment center, I felt betrayed, What the hell, And I remember going out in the field and just screaming and cussing him, How could you let this happen? How could I let this happen? And so I broke, and I walked away from it. And I just said, if you're there, show me, because what they told me is not true, what they told me is not true, and their version of it's not right. And just show me who you are, if you're there. And when I got out of there, I had to immediately get on a bus and take off for a 30-day tour. And my wife came with me. And she saw how hard I was working, and she decided to stay. And so we climb on the bus, and we take off. Oh, and then I won another Grammy. And again, there's no joy, I hated myself. And damn it, give it back. I'm not who you think I am. And if you knew me, if you knew what I was doing, you wouldn't give me this Grammy. So I left that treatment center just broken. And what do I do? How do I live? I have lived every day wanting to numb myself every day. And now, how do you live? What do you do? You got 24 hours of time and you don't know what to do because you wake up and it's alcohol. You go to bed and it's alcohol, and you're smoking also. So you hide. You hide. You hide. God, you feel so guilty and you feel so shameful. And I started a search. And I started going to AA. And we admitted that we're powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. Came to believe that a power in ourselves could restore us to sanity. Turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand Him. And AA was the first place I felt accepted. And I remember I had 3 weeks sobriety. I'd relapsed a little. No, it was before I went. It was after I got out of treatment. And I had a sponsor, great guy. And I, he's working with me. There's other people working with me, and they were really helping me, and they were trying to help me change and, help me get my life back together and all that. And I relapsed. And God, they were trying to help me, We go to Shoney's after a meeting, and they would just pour into me. And I relapsed. And I didn't stay drunk, but maybe 48 hours, and I called him, and I told him what happened. And he said, come with me, let's go to a meeting, because I told him I want to stay sober, I don't want to keep drinking anymore and that sort of thing. And he said, okay, but in the meeting, I want you to tell everybody what you did. It's like, fuck. And so I wanted to get sober. And he asked me, are you willing to go to any length to get well? Any length to get well. And I said yes. And I meant it. Yes, I will. I go to that meeting and so ashamed. They were trying to help me. You know, they poured into me. And so I go to the meeting. And I stand up and I tell everybody what I did. It's so hard. And at the end of the meeting, they have this chip called a desire chip. Would you like to stay sober for 24 hours? And I walk to the front, my head down, and I get the chip. And when I turned around, everybody applauded. They started clapping, saying, come on, Russ, we're so glad you're trying it again. And I was like, they accepted me. I could fall. I could struggle. And they just loved me, you know? And it was the first time in my life I felt accepted. And I work hard. You know, Tori and I, we're going to therapy, and I was trying to figure out how to be married. I didn't know. And I get sober, and I start liking myself, and my music just went, it just exploded. And I was back into it again. I mean, I got lost in music again, which was, it always saved me. Music always saved me. And I began to grow, and I began to change, and I worked so hard. I worked so hard. Are you willing to go to any length to get well? And I said yes, and I meant it. And so I got a 1-year chip. I'm sober 1 year. Golly, that was incredible. It was a miracle to me. And I'm changing, and I'm growing, and I'm learning how to be a husband. And my wife is starting to fall in love with me again. And I don't know, I started turning into somebody I liked for the first time in my life. I kind of liked me. And I thought I was a pretty cool guy. I mean, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. And I turned into a guy that I really thought, I'm good. I'm doing good. 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. And my dad dies. And I go to the funeral. And I'm standing there looking at that casket. And the casket was open, and there he was. And I loved him and I hated him. I loved him and I hated him. And in my mind, it's like, why the hell did you do that to us? Why were you so cruel, so mean? Why did you do that to us? And as I stood there, I began to, the inside of me just exploded. Oh, thanks, Mark. And so all the pain and hurt of that and my hatred for him, I wanted that to stop. And it was like, well, I can go to therapy for 4 weeks and learn how to deal with this. I can go to AA and try to figure out how to do this. But I wanted it to stop right then. And so I went and got a fifth of whiskey and it stopped. I mean, I drank it. Well, the pain went away, but I stuck a piece of dynamite under my house and just blew it up. Now I'm back. My wife's leaving me, and but I learned how to lie through those early years. I could look you right in the eye when I was drinking and just lie. But it was eating me alive inside. So anyway, back to treatment. And 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. And Mama dies. And I go to the funeral. And there she is laying in the casket. And I'm looking at her and I said, do you have any idea the damage of that emotional incest, what it did to me? And all you thought about was yourself and relieving your frustration and your hurt, and you dumped it on me. And I'm sitting there and it just all starts coming back. Of course, I was in therapy and I was going to AA, but all of a sudden it was just like so real and intense. I'm like, why? Why? And I loved her and I hated her. I was like, why didn't you leave? Even though I knew she couldn't. God, she had 5 boys and she couldn't leave, and she just took shit from him and took shit from him and took shit from him. So I go to the funeral and I relapse. I wanted the pain to stop. And I relapse. Again, stick a piece of dynamite under my house and just blew it up. Back to treatment. 4 years later, my little brother died, and by the time he was 10 and I was 12, I felt responsible for him. I was the one that made sure he did his homework. I was the one that made sure that we ate. There was such chaos in the house, and Mom and Dad and all of this, and all my brothers, 2 had gone to Vietnam, and I was just there, and so I was his parent. And after 19, he never sobered up. And he drank. And I would fly to California from Nashville, and I would just, I'll help you, I'll show you the way I got out. And he just, and I watched him slowly die. And for some reason, I felt responsible, like I did when he was 10. And so I'm at his funeral. And I felt so guilty and so shameful that I didn't do a good enough job with him. And so I relapsed again. Oh, and every time I was drinking like crazy, I was smoking like crazy. And smoking became a escape, me time. And through my life, it would be, I'd smoke for a couple of years, stop, smoke for a couple of years and stop, smoke for a couple of years. And that became such a powerful addiction for me. And again, you're hiding, you're lying, and putting a lot of cologne on. Holding your breath when you're around people and getting ready to walk on stage. You've been out back smoking. Shit. And you shouldn't, And so I come back to AA again, my sponsors. Thank God, man, all through the years, those guys worked with me. They helped me, and they never lost faith in me, and always kept coming to me to help me. And the therapist that I was going to said, Russ, until you deal with your childhood trauma, said, you're never going to stay sober. That every time one of your family members dies, you're going to relapse. But Mark, I keep going back. Are you willing to do anything to get well? Are you willing? Are you willing to do anything to get well? And so she says, until you deal with your childhood trauma, you'll never stay sober. And she found this place in Santa Fe, New Mexico, called Life Healing Center. I just felt like I had fucked up so much in my life. So I go there, and this thing in me of hatred and guilt and shame and blame, and I go there. And one of the first things they did was I had to pick out a Beanie Baby. Are you willing to do anything to get well? 50-year-old man would carry this Beanie Baby. Yeah, shit. But I did. And that was supposed to help me get in touch with that child that had been so abused and hurt. And so I carried a Beanie Baby for 2 weeks, trying to get in touch with that inner child that had just been shit on. And there was 20 people, I guess, and probably 5 therapists, and it was intense. It was just really intense. And when I got there, after a week or so in, group therapy, single therapy, and just kind of honestly getting me ready for what was about to come. And when I got there, they said, draw a picture of your higher power. And so I drew a picture of Jesus. And it was kind of like a stick figure I can't draw. But after 2 weeks, the main therapist said, Russ, bring Jesus, put him in a chair beside you because you're going to need him today. And I didn't know what to expect, and I went there with him. And I was at a point in this therapy that I was willing to start looking at this, all this stuff inside of me that held me captive, that kept sucking me back down, and that anger and that rage. And I went to the first memory that I had, and I'd forgotten so much of it and just shoved it out of the way. But I remember that I was 3 years old, and my little brother is 16 months younger than me, and I remembered taking his bottle and putting it in, and I started sucking on it, and Mom comes in and slaps me to the ground and said, you're too old for this, put it back, and she stuck it back in his mouth, and I'm sitting there like, shame. That memory. And it was like, gum wrappers all the way to the ceiling. And the filter that they had built somehow in me, that I took that memory and I went through this thing and I laid it over there. Second memory when I was 4. And I took it and ran through this filter somehow and I laid it over there. For 3 weeks, I took gum wrappers memories and run it through there and laid them over there. and cried every day, cried every day, cried every day. All these memories that I didn't want to remember, but I did then, and healings was starting to take place, just healing in me. And the rage went away. Every memory, I'd run through that filter, and I wasn't angry anymore. And I saw my parents as victims too, and that shocked me. They were victims. They were raised that way. And I went ahead and stayed 65 days there because it was changing me. And when I left there, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was free from all of that stuff. And I tell you, it was like, you open it up and it just all goes away. All goes away. I mean, there's still stuff, you never get rid of all of it. But God, dog, I felt light. I felt like a weight had just been lifted off of me, and you're throwing your arms up, looking at the sky, going, my God, this is awesome. This is incredible. Thank you. And I leave there, and I tell you, I was a different person. I was just a different person. And I go back home, and my wife is just shocked at the transformation that had happened in me. And golly, there was healing. There was real healing. And I was in Houston. I guess that had been like 4 months since that happened. And this is one of those things that was just orchestrated by my higher power. But I was in Houston, and there was a pastor that had liked my music over the years. He really liked my music. And he was dying of cancer. And he said, his son, would you call him or come by the hospital and just say hello? He loves your music. And it was a busy day, real busy day. But, I mean, he had pastored for 44 years and just married and buried and cared and that sort of thing. And it's like, how do you say no? And so I take my acoustic and I go to the hospital. And it's just one of those things that was just... And I take my guitar and I open the door. And this guy looks like my dad. White hair, big hands, tall, blue eyes. And I stopped. And I wanted to turn and run for some reason. He looked so much like him. And when I walked in, he threw his arms open and goes, oh, Russ, I'm so happy to see you, and tears rolling down his face. And I go over and I hug him, and I say, what song do you want to hear? And he would say, Heartbreak Ridge, and so I would sing it for him. And I sang for 45 minutes the songs that he wanted me to sing. And his wife kind of looked at me, and it's like he's getting tired. So I said, Pastor Jones, it's I gotta go. I gotta head. And he said, Russ, would you pray for me? And I wasn't at a place that I could pray for somebody like that. I didn't even know what to say. Because God and I were just starting to get our situation, back where I loved him and I was serving him. But I mumbled something. And I was so intimidated to pray for this guy. So when he finished, I finished. And I said this, and I said, Pastor Jones, would you pray for me? And I wish I hadn't said it. And he gets up out of his chair, and he's tall like my dad, and I'm looking up in those blue eyes and white hair and big hands, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he began to pray. Something broke inside of me. And I fell to my knees, and I began to weep and cry and moan. I mean, it's just something that it was just pouring out of me and pouring out of me. And the more he prayed, the more I cried. And he took my head and he laid it against his belly, and he began to stroke my hair. And he would say, Russ, God loves you so much. He loves you so much. He's so proud of you. He's so proud of what you've done with your life. And he began to affirm me and affirm me. And the more he did it, the harder I cried. And something happened in my spirit. Something happened way down in there that just broke, and a river began to flow out of me. And I was free. I was just free. And when I left there was another healing inside of me that had happened. To have your dad affirm you, to have your dad tell you you're doing good, and that he's proud of you. Oh my God, that changed me that day. And it freed me from all of that shit. My dad and alcohol and shame was gone. I felt free. I just felt free. Something happened inside of me. And I changed. Again, all of that guilt, that shame, that all of that stuff that I worked so hard in the treatment center and that sort of thing. But this went deep. This went really, really deep. When you look up and your dad is telling you that you're good and that he's proud of you. It was a miracle for me. It was just a flat-out miracle. And I've been sober 18 years. And it's hard work staying sober. I mean, it is. When my heart hurts, that's when I think about drinking, when there's really heartache. But I've learned how to reach out to my sponsor or reach out to my AA meeting friends and find support with them. They walked through hell with me, and they still will. But 18 years. And I'm turning into a guy that I really like. I am. And, all right, the whole smoking thing that had been such a bitch. Troy. You can get sober and everybody claps and yells and, you're free, you're not drinking anymore. But your life is still in shambles and chaos. It's like, okay, I'm not drinking. Great. But what the hell do I do with all of this stuff? How do I get it all back together? And Troy, he reached out to me. And he said, let me help. I appreciate, yes, please. And so he gets involved, and he helps this sober man with my wife that he loves, begins to get the pieces. And here, and take this piece and put it here, and take this piece and put it here. And there, all of a sudden, there's order in my life. And that was a miracle. You didn't wake up in the morning going, what the hell, but there was order. And And so I told Troy, I said, I think it's time to stop smoking. He didn't care that I smoked. He didn't care. But I said, would you help me? Okay. And he takes me to a graveyard. And he takes all my vape stuff. And I give it to him. And we put it in the graveyard. It died. Walk away, it's it. And I walked away from there ready for a bloody fight, ready for this thing. And I knew what was coming, and that addiction, and that, God, stopping smoking was so hard. And Troy, he was going back to his car, and I was heading to mine. And there was a quarter by his car that he picked up. And all of a sudden he had this idea, like, let this quarter be a touchstone. And so every day he would send me a picture with this quarter somewhere on his dog. He would be up and in the mountains, and he would put it against a rock. And for day after day after day, Troy would send me a picture of that quarter in all these different places. And there was somebody that would walk through that with me, and somebody I could lean on, somebody that I trusted. And thank God to be free from that. But anyway, I want to thank my wife, who didn't put up with shit, who would get in my face and not let me get away with anything. It's because of her that I kept fighting. But that's my story.
And it's a beautiful one. Thank you very much, Russ.
Thank you.